Hello there, listeners of the We Weren't There podcast. I know this is a strange introduction, however, our first serious technological problem has occurred, and unfortunately we lost a good bit of the first portion of our recording. So, in case you weren't aware, in case you're new here, but even if you're not and you're used to the structure, I am one of your co-hosts, Ben. The other person speaking is your co-host, Max, and we will be discussing different quotes relating to history, both from fiction and non-fiction sources. So yeah, let's move on to the actual episode now, shall we? Well, actually, I'll do this one first. This is from 1984.
Like the book, 1984?
Yeah, the book.
Okay.
Not the year.
Not the year, but George Orwell's 1984.
Exactly, 1984, written in 1949.
I think I know this quote.
Yeah. It's who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. This is from a fiction book, just to be clear. Obviously, it is one with a message, but this isn't necessarily, I'm not stating this as someone said this purely in a nonfiction context.
No, George Orwell wrote this in his book. But I think there's a lot of truth to what he says there, of course. Especially that he controls the present, controls the past. I mean, you see that a lot, the rewriting of history, depending on who's in power and who's in government. It's just a very common thing. And it's not just it's not a modern idea. Like, again, to go back, my guilty pleasure, go back to the Romans. The new emperors would come in and just like destroy all the evidence of the previous emperors. They like smash up statues in order to control the narrative of what happened. And I mean, of course, later on we see that a lot. Mm-hmm. Even in the U.S. with like the Lost Cause in the South.
Right. Though I think, again, the difficulty with that, like it's difficult to have complete control of the present, right? So it's not like you're saying like smashing up a lot of past emperors in China, for example, like a lot of their artifacts. That history still survives because they didn't get to everything, right?
Yes, and of course, in George Orwell's book, it's because they're an all-encompassing totalitarian government. They can do that.
But I think there is truth to the fact that even then, we all see it from the perspective of one man who lives in the system in a city and doesn't really have much of a perspective outside of it. So, having control over an education system, being a modern state, you kind of have the ability to, you control the present, right? So controlling history, what's taught, what the larger population knows, even if it's not necessarily all knowledge in the world.
But like the average...
the consensus,
yeah,
right?
And what's considered like common sense and common knowledge.
Exactly.
But I think there's a lot of danger in that. Even the way we teach history. We just talked about this in my historiography class. But the way we teach history to elementary school students and high schools, obviously you can't teach them what we learn in university. It's not how that works. But
oh yeah, I'm sure I can teach all my modernist Asian class to an elementary school student.
But this is the focus, I think, should be shifted away from, because the way we teach history is as one narrative, like this is what happened. This is the objective truth of what happened.
Not only that, but cause and effect. That's what I feel like all of my teachers told me throughout like those history classes. Is history is about cause and effect.
Yes, X thing happened.
Is the effects. Here's the causes.
Yes. And I think we should focus more, even in high school and elementary school, of making it more about critical thinking and doing like analysis. And
right.
Like coming to your own conclusions based on the evidence available to you. I mean, as much as you can do that with a group of sixth graders, but I feel like I'm not an educator, but there's probably a way to do that. It's like age appropriate, but I think that would probably help avert a lot of these problems. If you make it so people are more, like their first instinct isn't just to believe that there's a single correct narrative, but that there's multiple interpretations that are equally valid depending on the evidence.
I was going to say, I don't necessarily think that teaching people how to analyze stuff is necessarily helpful, because I do think there's value in kind of establishing a baseline of knowledge, right? Because I feel like the issue with that, if you take it to that route, then like...
people too skeptical of everything?
Yeah, but also, plenty of, like, let's say for, like, there's the example of, well, there's multiple perspectives on, let's say, health science, for example. Some people say vaccines are safe. Some people say vaccines cause autism. Let's critically read these things and have our own conclusions.
But what I'm saying is people don't do that right, because if they did look at the evidence, they'd see that one side has overwhelmingly more evidence.
How do you get someone to understand the significance of certain pieces of evidence?
Well, you teach them what constitutes good research. Like, that's part of what our methodology classes are about. Like, because part of my class is evaluating, like,
no, but I understand that, but you are doing that as a university student. How do you establish that to a high school student who barely cares?
True.
Right. I think that is.
I don't think that means we shouldn't try, but that is
No, I understand.
obviously a challenge.
But what I'm saying is that I don't think we shouldn't do that either. I think especially in like English classes, for example, that is like main curriculum these days is critical thinking and analysis in that kind of way and coming up with your own conclusions. I think is just that in that kind of context of high school and elementary school, the purpose isn't like of those classes of history class, for example, isn't necessarily to get you to have a nuanced understanding. It's to get you a baseline understanding of the U.S. is the U.S. because of this. What I think would be better is to have different perspectives on why. Have a curriculum be like, this is what these people think, this is what these people think, this is what these people think. Right?
Okay. And why?
Different forms of analysis, and then maybe like learn analysis on the same way, like in the same way that you're saying, but at least present the different perspectives and then use the analysis as a way to explain this is how these different people get to these different conclusions, right? Because then I think you kind of cover the base of having baseline knowledge, at least of different perspectives, rather than of the truth.
Narrative. Yeah,
like
I think that's fair. Yeah, it's an interesting question though, because it's not always easy to teach. I mean,
no, and again, we're saying this as like
people who
students
like
ourselves,
stuff.
you know,
and people who like
this
this
is how
stuff.
we think we should have gone through this. Actually,
well, we're saying that both.
I think we should have no homework,
both as students and as people who have obviously an interest in history. Like we're taking this stuff in university, and like if you hate it, it's probably because I would have loved to do that in high school.
Most people I talk to about history, like especially people in other programs, they're like, oh yeah, I hate my history. Like I hate history, and I'm like, okay. And I was like, no, you hate history class. Like there's a difference.
Yes, you hate the concept of history.
Yeah.
Everything is only exists in the now. There is no past.
The present. I love the present.
But I do have that's one of the things that bugs me a lot is the rewriting of the past and particularly the destruction of historical documents and things like that.
That is very frustrating.
Particularly when it's to serve a very short-sighted political aim or something, and it's clearly in an effort to try and legitimize your regime or whatever in X country.
Yeah.
And you're like depriving people of the future of the ability to properly understand parts of the past.
The unfortunate thing of those systems as well is that if it is destroyed in a lot of cases, we wouldn't have any way to know about it, which again is the whole point. But like sometimes there are things that could have happened that, you know, maybe one person is like yelling out in the street, like saying this totally happened, you know, let's say, I don't know, aliens, let's say far out there idea.
Well, even
aliens, if there are documents of that somewhere and then they're like shredded and they're not part of any like official documentation, they're never like ordered to be documented anywhere or whatever. Even if one person of that was part of that program tells people, yeah, that happened.
We got to be careful with that though, because that gets into like conspiratorial thinking. Because
yeah, well, that's the thing. I also think that there's not much use in thinking that way because I use aliens as an example of like, let's say there's one incident regarding an alien. If there's a constant knowledge of aliens
like
existing,
that would come out,
there are so many people that would need to be involved in the process that becomes moot, right?
Yeah.
What I mean is that like if there's one crash landing that immediately like gets destroyed all evidence when there was like 5 people there and then one of them breaks, that's not gonna do much.
I mean, I say that, but like, mind you, like imagine how insane you would have sounded in the 80s or whatever if you went, oh, the CIA is dosing people with LSD to like mind control them or whatever, and you're like a victim of MK Ultra and you have no like recourse for any of that.
Yeah,
but that did, like, you know, again, that did come out because it's impossible to hide. There's so many people involved.
No, that's what I'm saying is that it came out and even like not too like.
No, there was an investigation
afterwards, right?
Because but you just can't keep things like that secret when it was too much. Like someone is gonna go, this is crazy, and like tell people about it, or more than one person.
Yeah. But, you know, also I think that it's also important to know that you can't know everything at the same time.
No,
I think that's why a lot of conspiratorial thinking goes awry, is that there's this kind of like, I need to be able to grasp everything. I need to be able to understand everything. Everything needs to make sense in this perfect system, when that rarely is the case.
Well, I think a lot of that also comes from people thinking that everything has to have a logical explanation, when in fact a lot of what the government does or what like humans do as a group is just sort of random or is motivated by things far beyond our understanding. It's not some big orchestrated cabal, you know?
Yeah, well, you know what? This topic is a nice segue for my next quote.
Oh, okay.
Since we're already on this topic, I'll just bring it up now. This is from, I wish I could say the name. It's from Zbigniew Brzezinski, who's, well, it's from the New York Times. It's a journalist, but I'm not too familiar with their practice and what they wrote about. But their quote, okay, no, I know this guy. He was like a Polish-American journalist who wrote for the New York Times. His quote here is, history is much more the product of chaos than of conspiracy.
Oh, that is true. People will always assume that oh, this was all planned by, I don't know, whatever your preferred flavor of government elites, secret society, whatever. But in reality,
I prefer my corporate elites, but
yeah, you know, whatever your flavor ideology. But in reality, it's so much of this is either pure chance, like absolute nonsense reasons that you would never believe if there was no evidence for it. Like, I'm trying to think of a good example of some ridiculous situation, but there's probably a war that started over something really stupid, right?
Well, there's plenty. I mean, the First World War. Well, that's not stupid, but
yeah, like that's a good example because people would think, oh, maybe that's like a big orchestrated effort, but it's actually a massive chaos of people trying to de-escalate. And
that still works as a great example.
And it's often forces beyond.
Yeah, which to be fair, there are like conditions that kind of cause the circumstances of that.
Yeah, but it's not orchestrated by a group.
No, it's not a cabal that made it also.
It's just that the Brits have an interest in keeping Europe divided and not too powerful.
Yeah, the French have an interest in containing Germany, so they have this alliance with Russia, and Russia has an interest in gaining more power in the Balkans and all cannibalizing the Ottoman Empire.
And all this leads to increasing militarization, and they all start arming themselves, and now they're sort of primed for war.
Right. It's not that all the leaders came together, all the grandsons of Queen Victoria came together and were like, oh yes, let's start this this great war.
Sarajevo was an inside job.
Sarajevo was an inside. That's right. Franz Josef, I think that was the
assassin's name.
No, the Habsburg.
It was
Franz Joseph.
Ferdinand.
Ferdinand was the guy who died. I mean.
Oh, you mean the okay, yeah.
I think it was Franz Joseph.
Yeah, it's Franz Joseph. I'm pretty sure.
Like Franz Joseph did Sarajevo. Is actually
he paid the Black Hand.
Yeah, exactly. But that is a perfect example. It like there's the human element no matter what.
Yeah.
And it might be conspiracy, but at the same time, even a conspiracy in itself can be subject to incompetence.
And also, I think people underestimate how these world leaders are just people, and a lot of the time it's motivated by stupid things like
ego
or emotion or like rivalries with like this. Arguably, this war is a war between cousins or greed. Yeah, very human things. And I mean, obviously that's mitigated a little bit in systems where the power is spread out. But if you look at stuff where there's emperors or people with absolute authority, it gets even worse.
Exactly. Especially, that's the thing. Those kinds of things are even more subject in systems where power is more concentrated in the hands of a few.
In the whims of like one or a couple guys.
Exactly. It becomes more subject to these very human things. If you spread out the power a lot, then it kind of becomes more secure in the sense that one person
who has a bad day can't end the world or can't declare war.
Exactly. Like that's the reason why, having hierarchy of nuclear weapons being so like spread out and needing like two people to press the button, whatever.
Yes, it's so we don't have a loony who decides he's tired of the world.
Exactly. No, even during the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's only thanks to one person that a Russian submarine didn't launch I think it was a nuclear tipped torpedo or something like that. Yeah. So, and that was irregularly needed 3 people to actually accept. But they didn't, and thankfully we're still here today, and that's all because power is spread out. Instead of being in the hands of one person.
It's a very compelling argument for
not monarchy.
Any kind of decentralized kind of government.
Yeah, I mean that's why I'm a fan of decentralized government, because the thing is, the other issue is like, oh yeah, it's slow and it's not as agile. But then when they have their hands on nuclear weapons, they can't end the world because someone said a mean thing once.
Well, imagine if Richard Nixon, who was trashed half the time he was in the office, and ordered the nuking of North Korea one night when he was plastered, was just allowed to do what he wanted without the Joint Chiefs of Staff's input.
Well, he would have nuked Vietnam, let's be real.
Yeah, probably.
He'd have been like, let's just wipe Ho Chi Minh off the map. I can't deal with this anymore.
I mean, again, I would,
if not the entire southeastern region.
That's a fantastic example of something I would have never believed had there not been phone transcripts of people like attesting and just hearing him like drunk as hell on the phone of him like constantly, like you wouldn't know if he only saw his public appearances because he keeps himself together, but when he's in the White House, this guy is wasted all the time.
He keeps himself together when he's not melting on camera.
Yeah. Yes, the infamous debate.
Well, that, but even later on when he's like, I'm not a crook, like
very clearly
sweating.
being a crook.
Yeah, while sounding like the crookiest crook.
We'll do a Nixon episode one day. I think it's inevitable.
That's like
that I'll do a
3
Nixon.
episodes worth. It's like, let's talk about 2 people in the Nixon administration. It's a 40-hour epic.
Honestly, like you could probably do a multi-parter just on like Kissinger easily.
I mean, didn't the Behind the Bastards do that?
They did do that, yeah.
Was
like
it 3 or 4 parts?
Yeah, and it was like several hours long.
Exactly. So that's one guy within the administration, let alone
the clown house that is the Nixon administration. And
the whole administration, yeah. So anyway, moving past that, let's talk about something else a bit. I have this quote, which I'm sure I already know your feelings on this, as I know mine. This is from Thomas Carlyle, who I'm not too familiar with, but he's I believe 1800s. More of a, SK here it is, essayist, historian, and philosopher of the Victorian era. So his quote here, no great man lives in vain. The history of the world is but the biography of great men.
Product of his time, I guess. That was a very popular, arguably still in pop history and in popular culture.
Oh, yeah.
A popular idea that history is made by men.
I mean, I think even, like, without intentionally thinking of it that way, I think people consume it that way, right?
When
it comes to media.
Well, especially movies or documentaries, I mean, people, like, it's always sent, like...
I mean, people like stories, and people's lives make great stories, so that's kind of how you conceive of history, even if it's not necessarily how you should.
Well, I mean, frankly, because it's really complicated and boring for someone to explain all the economic and social and cultural reasons why something happened, as opposed to this guy, he did this himself, you know?
I mean, that was, speaking of last episode, that was like me trying to explain the life of one guy. It was so difficult. I had to establish so much context and make it seem like this guy was a great man who lived, who did so much by himself.
All on his own, with no historical forces behind him.
Yeah, exactly. Who was his father? Never heard of him.
Careful, you're starting to sound like a Marxist. Your historical materialism.
Well, it's not necessarily just materialism, but I think today, among historians, it is generally accepted that...
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's not true. You know, history is a lot more complex than the biography of great men.
Well, it's like they say, I mean, there's arguments to be made for particular people and particular moments that maybe if they had died, things wouldn't have happened. But the vast majority of the time, it was like something similar, if not identical. Like
yes, but also it's important to know as well that people are only capable and have certain ideas because of the conditions in which they live.
Yeah, right? That's it. Like,
which is kind of the more Raudellian view of it, is how much the environment and conditions of great men impact the decisions they make. So while it may seem like great men are like the decision makers, are people who determine how history goes down, they themselves are the product of greater forces.
What's the whole thing of if you went back in time to kill Hitler, like there probably still would be a Second World War. It's almost inevitable that a revanchist, like, you know, angry, probably far right party would arise in Germany. It would just probably be
Mussolini already did, right?
Yeah, it would be a different flavor, but it would be the same sort of general outcome.
Yeah, the conditions.
Well, I say that we don't know, but
no, but the conditions of the post-war year was like, unless some drastic changes were made, were leading up, especially after the Great Depression, to explosive conflict.
But at that point, you're changing things that aren't just people. You'd have to say like, oh, the Great Depression is not as rough in Germany, and
exactly.
I don't know, there.
And then you've kind of already disarmed the entire argument.
Yeah, yeah. I do wonder if there is like. Not provably, but like somewhere in history, there's a guy who, if he had not lived, like something super significant wouldn't happen.
I think I have an interesting view of that, because right now I'm looking into the Spanish transition to democracy after Franco, and there's a lot of debate over what not necessarily what exactly happened, because for the most part we know what happened, but why, how, all these different things, different interpretations. People view it from a sociological, economic, cultural perspective, political perspective, all that stuff. And that is one of those things which I found very convincing, articles and chapters of books arguing that the people in power at the time were actually very much important, in the fact that if they weren't there at that time, the transition to democracy wouldn't have happened, which is specifically mentioning Juan Carlos. Who was now he's the former king, but he was the person who became king of Spain after Franco died, because Franco was never king, but he had made himself dictator, and he had chosen Juan Carlos, who was in the Bourbon dynasty, which was the dynasty that ruled over Spain for a few centuries before the Spanish Civil War, well, before the foundation of the Second Spanish Republic, actually. And Franco chose Juan Carlos, who was very young at the time, kind of on purpose, because then he had someone who he knew kind of educate Juan Carlos, and is actually that man who, at least according to Juan Carlos, and it's most likely true, that he kind of educated him in the ways of, democracy is not such a bad idea, even though he was picked as a successor of a dictator, and this dictatorial system had existed between what was it, like 1936, I think, roughly late 30s, which is when Franco won the Spanish Civil War, to 75, which is when Franco died.
Right.
Which after that's when the transition started. So that's like a good 40 years of dictatorship. But if it wasn't for that one guy who had very specific ideas, who worked with Franco, so he's not a Francoist, right? Like, he got to his position somehow, having certain ideas and talking to Juan Carlos about them. So as soon as Juan Carlos was in power, he made certain like political maneuvers to transition the country to democracy, which is something that probably wouldn't have happened because, like, Spanish population, even up to like the 2000s to a certain degree, their participation in government was very much decreased living under a dictatorship, right? And there's not as much of a culture for that. And while there were kind of associations propping up and there were parties who fought for freedoms, for a more democratic system, it wasn't like powerful enough to really cause an immediate revolution.
So it was more of a top-down.
It was very much a top-down.
Than a popular.
Although at the same time, there was also a bottom-up kind of effort that kind of was allowed to exist because of that. But it was very much controlled by the people in power. So it was a very much top-down approach that didn't necessarily have to happen, like, to democracy specifically that soon, but did because of the specific ideations of Juan Carlos and the people around him.
But I suppose one could argue that they would have inevitably transitioned into democracy.
At one point.
Yes. But that particular moment, you could say, is because of him.
Exactly.
Or his tutor, if you want to go further back.
Yeah, and also, I didn't see any arguments arguing for it, but it was actually in 1975 when Portugal had their own revolution from dictatorship to democracy. Yeah, exactly. That's when the Carnation Revolution occurred. So I didn't see any articles arguing for that specifically, but
New
that
thesis
might have been
topic.
a factor. Well, I don't have any evidence on that, and I don't even necessarily think that's one of the main causes either. I'm very convinced that Juan Carlos also personally wanted a more democratic system, not just because he thought that was right, but also because it would add stability to his reign as a monarch, given that in Europe, like, constitutional monarchies were common enough. They were shown to work. But it is very interesting that is one event where great men do seem to decide history, at least of their moment, right? Which is, one of the arguments that would come up to be like, well, maybe it sometimes is.
Well, like everything is nuanced.
Exactly. Which I still think it isn't, because, through this research, I also found many, many, many conditions which led to it. Right. Which, like you said, may have made it inevitable, even though the people in power had, like, a lot of decision-making power. It's nuanced, like all things. Some people in positions of power have the ability to make great changes, and some of those people decide to make great changes, but those people are conditions of their time, conditions of their upbringing, conditions of their environment.
This is a weird side note, but have you read? No, you haven't. Isaac Asimov's Foundation. No. It's kind of the premise of the book, weirdly enough.
Yeah.
Is that there's this historian. He's a psycho-historian because 70s future talk.
Oh, because Isaac Asimov.
Yeah. And he's
not a psychotic historian.
No, he's a psycho historian, like psychology and history.
Yeah.
And supposedly he invents and perfects the science of psychohistory, which is the ability to predict over very long periods of time what will happen to society, right?
Okay, I've heard of this story. Yeah. Now that you're explaining it.
And it just makes me think of this because he's basically the ultimate refutation to great man theory in that. Because they say no matter who's in charge, like, obviously he's like, I cannot predict the actions of individuals, but I can of groups over, like, because the books take place, like, the whole series is over 1,000 years.
Okay.
So, like, he's able to predict, he's dead, obviously, by the time, like, even the second book or the first book finishes.
But he's made his predictions.
And the whole book is about the society he sets up and how they're basically keep falling into succeeding because he sets up the ideal conditions for them to not fail, no matter who's in charge. They literally, half the time, their philosophy is just to do nothing. So it just makes me think of that, like, he's the ultimate refutation to great man theory, I guess.
That if you
But it's science fiction. But
no, I understand, but I think the idea presents is, like, if you understand enough of the conditions, like, in existence, which, is practically impossible, especially in this day and age, but given this future technology, if you have enough, like, variables written down and, like, their trajectories and their trends, then you can predict to a certain degree.
Yeah, that's his whole thing, is that he's a mathematician. He has complex formulas, which is like every factor in human society, like,
which I like. That's one of those things where I kind of in the back of my mind, kind of believe.
Like theoretically, obviously, but we would never. You need.
But I think it's
access.
impossible to actually get all those variables, because I'm thinking like if you understand all things at like the level of quarks, like the fundamental building blocks, and you have an idea of where like all of them are at this very moment, and somehow like mathematically calculate that and like their trajectories and trends, and again so many more factors, then in theory you could.
Well, not in physics, because there is real random. Well, if you believe, this is a side tangent, has nothing to do with history, but if you believe in like quantum physics and all that, there's things that are possibly in two places until you observe them, right? The whole shooting.
But then if you can understand when things are, I guess then they're still random even. I don't know.
You can't be certain, because the whole thing is he's certain in the book.
That's true.
But I think it makes sense because he's predicting kind of group psychology, like how people will behave in like a huge mass, because it's set in space, right? Because it's the future, so it's like over trillions of planets. He's like predicting that this will happen, and he's not very specific. It's just like, oh, this.
Yeah, because even in that science fiction scenario, they can't specifically predict what's going to happen in one person's life.
No, they make a whole thing about that because people are like, why don't you predict what will happen to this particular planet? And he's like, even then, that's very dubious at best. He just like he's better at if it's like a nation.
Yeah, if it's a large scale.
Yeah,
it's a macro scale.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate
which
macro.
In that era is trillions of planets.
Yeah, his whole prediction is that his society will eventually found a new empire and like end. They call it the years of savagery and barbarism that are supposed to last 10,000 years if he doesn't do this. So he's like humanity's savior. It's a really, really great book series.
It does sound good. I mean, Asimov, famous for his ideas and his books, and
as you might expect, the characters are dry as hell. Though you're reading it like I'd argue the society is the character if you want to get all literary, because obviously, like
you're doing some analysis now on me.
Well, because they're going to succeed, right? I mean, maybe there's a twist later. I'm only on the second book, but where he's like wrong, but I doubt it.
No, I get that.
Anyways, you have another quote?
Yes, I do. History is not the past, but a map of the past, drawn from a particular point of view to be useful to the modern traveler. And this is from Henry Glassy in Passing the Time in Ballamenon, which I think is a nonfiction book, if I'm correct, but I might be wrong about that.
I think it's it goes back to what we were saying about how it's all about interpreting the past.
Exactly.
And you're always interpreting it through the lens of the present, which can be a problem. Presentism is... There's an argument to be made that it's a good thing and it's important to put yourself in the shoes of people in the past, say like, but I'll never really know what it was like to be like a Roman. Right. Their conception of the world was very different, but we shouldn't let that stop us from trying, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
You should just acknowledge that you'll never fully understand, but it's still okay and it's a good thing to relate it to your life.
Exactly. No, you should relate it to your life, but in seeking to understand it, you have to try your best to put yourself in that position.
Yeah, and you can't fall into the fallacy of they were exactly like me, so they must think like I do. Because then you get into weird situations where you do interpretations like... well, actually, I saw a really interesting example in a paper I had to read for my historiography class, where this historian was doing research about public history and the general American public's knowledge of history. Right. And he went to a bunch of AP history students in high school. And he gave them primary sources about this battle during the Revolutionary War. I can't remember what it was.
Right.
And in the documents, it describes how there's this large army of British, and it's more aptly described as a massacre, basically, because there's like 80 Americans.
Yeah.
Anyways, and then he asks the students to describe in writing like what happened, basically as like a narrative based on the documents they read. And they very accurately describe it as kind of like a massacre. Whatever. And then he shows them a bunch of paintings of the same battle, and he's like, which one of these do you think most accurately represents what would have happened there? And there's one where they're like kind of hiding behind rubble and buildings and taking like pot shots at the British, like very guerrilla style, and there's another one where they're all lined up fighting in like Napoleonic. And almost all of them picked the one where they're hiding behind rubble and they're like not in formation. And they're like, that's, even though this was a massacre, that's not true. Because just the conception that you would do that back then, that would have been seen as really dishonorable, and just not something people would have done. It's like not in their not that they couldn't have figured that out, but it would have been seen as like almost distasteful way of fighting. So even though they were like up against a huge army,
this is the age before Star Wars, guerrilla warfare.
Well, this is the age of let's line up and politely shoot at each other, at least for the Europeans. So they still lined up and they shot at each other.
The indigenous people who were experts at guerrilla warfare in the Americas at the time.
But it just goes to show, like, that's him, kind of the student projecting his conceptions of what he would do, which is when we think outnumbered, soldiers fighting. It's, oh, we're gonna hide and we're gonna, like because guerrilla warfare exists in our kind of collective consciousness, if you will.
Yeah.
Whereas for those people back then, it wouldn't have even been an option they would have considered. Really, it would have been, we're gonna do this the right way and stand in line and shoot at each other. So I thought that was.
I mean, I think that is also like, given the idea of guerrilla warfare coming from the Iberian War during the Napoleonic era, like even the term itself comes from a concept which originates from a very specific time and place, right? So it kind of gives you an idea of, okay, well, at the time, they obviously wouldn't have called it guerrilla warfare, but what conception would they have of that kind of fighting, right?
I know for Europeans, at least, it would have been seen as kind of like cheap and dishonorable and not a correct method, if there's such a thing, of fighting wars.
Yeah, not a proper war.
Yeah, if you will. But I know like other societies would have still practiced similar types of fighting to that. Like you said, the Native Americans during the Revolutionary War very much did, conduct hit and runs and similar types of battles.
Yeah, and I do think, the American settlers did also adopt, some groups at least did adopt that kind of fighting style. I'm trying to think of, was it the Green Mountain Boys or something? Even then, I'm not 100% sure what their style of fighting was, but, less stand in the field. They were like sharpshooters and like that kind of idea of warfare. But, presentism is something that we should be really careful of. And I also want to point out this quote is from 1982, so it is closer to the present, which may explain how.
But I've also read a lot of articles, stuff like titled "In Defense of Presentism," because there's a lot of people who feel we've swung too far into the past is alien and we can't really understand it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that you can't.
It's one of those things.
Give up on understanding it. Right?
Yeah, it's a balancing act of these people are human.
And I think the question also of that interpretation of history is then, how do you treat morality?
Yeah, that's obviously where it gets dubious. But historians don't generally pass judgment on people. That's not what we do.
No, but then the question is, should they?
That is a good question.
And I'm not saying we can answer that, because that's a very philosophical question.
I mean, it's a question that like haunts history a little bit.
Yeah,
because
especially in recent decades.
And I've read arguments both ways. I've read arguments that you should let emotion enter your writing as long as you make it clear to your viewer or your viewer or your reader or whatever.
Yeah, your audience,
like that you do have this bias. Like you view these people negative. Like you can't try to hide it. It's dishonest.
But even then, when you say that, then you're still using it as like, this is a way of kind of reaching a lack of judgment. Then if you use it as just, oh, these are my biases, then it's still trying to get the audience to achieve a kind of more neutral understanding of the history, since their understanding of your morality can let them subtract it or agree with it or all that stuff. Right?
It's actually from the same paper that I get this from, the same paper with the Revolutionary War, because he did another thing with history teachers, where he was like, you have to rewrite this. They were like rewriting part of a textbook.
Okay.
And, originally the textbook is super dry. It just kind of gives facts. And then he gives them like a diary because it's about women's contributions to the colonial economy.
Okay.
He gives them a diary of a woman, like that lists everything she does every day. And, it evokes a lot of strong reactions in the people. And what he found shocking was they still stopped themselves. They still wrote in a very, like, the facts were more correct, but it's still a super neutral tone that doesn't really adopt the narrative. Like, people are almost afraid to adopt a narrative.
Right.
Because, like you said, like, you can do that. You can make your voice heard, and like you don't have to fade into the background. Like, the author is inevitably going to be part of whatever you write.
Yeah.
You should just make it obvious that you should make obvious what's you and what's the sources. To
leave it to the audience to then kind of have an understanding of where it's being written from.
Because being overly clinical in your writing, I mean, there's.
I mean, it's dry.
There's benefits. It depends what you're trying to accomplish, really. Because there's types of writing like that is very useful. Like if someone's trying to give you an overview of what happened and it's very dry and they just give you names and dates and this is why this happened, it can be useful. But I think there's a lot of value also in someone being like trying to evoke an emotion in you. Yeah. Like maybe that's more. I mean, some would say that's more for the domain of like fiction and literature. Maybe they should, historians should leave it to that. But I don't know. I think there's a value in evoking that in someone because I think it makes you closer to the history. I don't know. Maybe it gives you a better. But I mean,
also I think a lot of the sources that you find are like that, right? They do pass judgment.
Like primary sources or secondary?
I mean, primary sources, but even secondary sources it's more, of the time. Yeah. It's even like ones that pass, you're like talking about, let's say, go back to Thucydides, but you can think of many examples afterwards. Like, He's still passing judgment on a lot of what's happening, right?
Yeah, but he doesn't say he's passing judgment, you know?
No,
Yeah.
but the judgment is made by how it's written.
Yeah, it's very obvious if you're looking for it, like who he thinks was morally correct in the Peloponnesian War and what he thinks about war in general.
Exactly. Like, that's passing quite a bit of judgment.
But I would argue, what's the point of history if you're just going to regurgitate facts? You almost need to use, I think it's almost more useful to use it to make a point about the present.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because the thing is, in my head, I think there's place for both.
Yeah, obviously.
I don't think you need to choose either or. I think there's place for
but I don't think we should
trying to get the facts as straight as possible and then interpreting that, especially if you're trying to tie it to today or trying to make it relevant in some way, then you kind of have to pass judgment because then, like, let's say, oh, this is how the Roman Republic fell. And it's like, cool. What does that say about today? And it's like, I don't know. I'd have to get into opinions. I'd have to talk about what I think is right and wrong, and then we can't touch it. But then that's where the value of passing judgment on it is. How
and I think that's a lot of what
the information.
Well, a lot of the value history brings to society is how you can use the past to understand the present. So I think at a certain point you've got to be like, we shouldn't do this again, or maybe they had some good ideas back, But yeah, I think that there's room for both, and they both are very important. But I don't know about passing like hard judgment on historical figures. It's kind of a weird thing to do.
Yeah, well, I think that then that becomes less a question of how you study it, like the study of history, and more how you ingest history.
Yeah,
like
at the same time, it is kind of, I don't know,
because a lot of the, let's say when it comes, I'm going to bring an example of, we live in Montreal. There's a statue of John A. Macdonald that came down.
Yes, I remember that.
Because of people passing judgment on his views, which I agree that they are horrible, and I'd rather not have a statue of someone who's, believes such things about human beings.
Yeah.
Obviously about Indigenous Americans, creating the residential school system. Also had a lot of stuff about Aryan people before it was cool.
Also an alcoholic, like a lot of these guys.
Yeah. Severe, even for the time, a severe alcoholic.
Enough to be noted by his contemporaries.
Exactly. Enough that a documentary I watched, it was a movie, which was like dramatizing
his life.
John A. Macdonald, made a point to show how much of an alcoholic he was, which was very positive towards him because it was very pro-Canada, the founding of Canada. Right. Made a point to show that he was a drunk, but
well, I think it's a little different.
But that's what I'm saying, is that the ingestion of that history, I think it's different than when you make a statue, right?
But I don't think that's the domain of history to decide. Like, I think it's important to talk about who we valorize in our society and who we put emphasis on.
But then that's
not really a history question.
Yeah, but I think then that is a judgment in itself, in that, whether representations of historical figures are present in society today is not a question of history.
It's more a question of what our values today are.
Exactly.
I accept,
because I think a lot of the arguments for we should keep those things up is
the products of their time. Yeah.
They're products of their time. It's history. It's still, part of our past, all that stuff.
If you really care that much about the statue, put it in a museum. Don't because when you put it in the public square,
that is the common counter argument.
Yeah, you put it in this public square. It's like you're saying that as a society today, we still value what this guy did more than we disagree with what he did. Almost, it's like you're still saying that he was fundamentally like a net gain for society or something.
Exactly. Which
at that point is no longer a question. It's more like a political science or sociology question about.
Like, I'm happy Canada exists, right? At least I'm happy with my life and the life that
the
country has given me. I don't necessarily agree with, first of all of what the country does in the present, but also everything that happened in its past, let alone the person who contributed significantly to its founding.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that you just it's almost like a pointless debate. It's like getting into like the tragedy Olympics of trying to judge like which atrocities were like they're all bad. Okay, you just gotta like they're terrible in their own right.
We live in a nuanced world where we have choices to make, and those choices should be made more on the present if they are about the present, and if they are in the interest of learning more about the past, then that's when you ditch presentism, because then that's your goal now, is to understand the past, right? If you're making a statue for today, seeking to understand the past in like objective terms and passing judgment on these people, or at least like making up for their very bad things they did by bringing up how important they are, it's not as much a question about that anymore. It's about valorization. It's about idolization.
And you see this obviously because we don't question the statues of Romans that are still in public and things like that. People who committed, arguably what would today be called acts of genocide.
Well, Caesar, Augustus.
Yeah, because it's so clearly a contemporary issue. It's all people who were more recent and more involved in like political parties or identities that still exist today.
Exactly. 2,000 years ago, we're so detached from that.
He killed all the Gauls, but it's like there's no Gauls left to.
Oh, there were Gauls. That's
but there's no one. There's no one who considers themselves Gaulish to protest that there's a
other than
Caesar
people
statue
who are concerningly into that level of
ancestry. Yeah, that.
But anyway, I think that is a discussion that is also beyond us.
Yeah, well, we're not nearly qualified enough, but that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, exactly. I think in seeking history, ditching presentism is important, but when you get outside the realm of history, that is when you should get outside the realms of what you think history should be determined by.
The question is, when does it become history? That's a controversial topic,
That's
too.
another question.
How old does something have to be for it to be a historical subject?
Well, yeah, that is a good question. I mean, I'd argue anything before the present is history, but
before you can do an adequate analysis of
that's the question: is when is an accurate when can you judge an accurate analysis as opposed to a political or sociological or some other judgment?
Mm. I've heard 20 years
argument.
is like a rough rule, but that's some guy came.
Well, you
got
to cut the line somewhere.
Yeah, that's just something someone came up with. It's not necessarily like even widely accepted, but I've heard that before.
20 years. I mean, I feel like even that might be too soon for my tastes, but I do understand cutting it there because I'd push it more towards 30 to 40 years because I'd be more comfortable trying to make accurate judgments about, let's say, I think American history kind of cuts it more cleanly between like the Reagan era and the Clinton era.
I think Clinton is in history now. I'd say
yes, but I'd be more confident in making historical
claims and interpretations
about the Reagan era than the Clinton era.
Mm-hmm. When do all the documents declassified? How many years is that? That's when it should. That's when you can do the proper.
I think that might be 30 years as well, but I might be wrong about that. I think
it depends on how secret they are. And
it depends on their classification.
Yeah, because there's different rules.
Mm-hmm. I just know there's stuff from the 80s that's being declassified. Actually, no, I think it's the JFK. Well, no, the JFK files.
That was
is a decision.
That was an executive order or whatever. That was a choice they did.
Exactly. So never mind. Okay, I got another topic here because we're getting down in the weeds now. This is from Vladimir Kara-Murza, as quoted in "Russia Will Be Democratic" in 2024.
Is it like a manifesto or like a political?
I mean, it's a political document, but this is a statement about history. It's not talking about Russian history specifically. Right. But obviously, it's towards a point. But let's talk about it. This is a very recent quotation.
Well, last year, yeah.
Exactly. History is just as much a science as chemistry or physics. It has its own laws. It has its own logic.
Well, this is actually a very large debate, believe it or not, in historiography and history methodology in general. Because you've got people who, and this is a turn that kind of flip-flops depending on the era.
Right.
I know for a while people were very, very into like economic history and cyclical history and the longue durée and the idea that you can, like, history is like a science. There's rules and there's systems that you can like test and prove.
Especially economics likes to make the argument. I mean, it in itself is like a social science that people say it's a social science that disguises itself as a science.
Yeah.
But they that prestige kind of gets applied to a lot of different subjects, including history.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends on how you define a science. It's kind of difficult if you define science as something that's like a reproducible, verifiable hypothesis, because it's down to interpretation. Yeah. And there's more than one that can be argued properly, and you can't really prove one is. You can prove one's more correct, but you can't prove that one's definitively correct usually. Yeah.
But then you can also argue that you also can't prove something is definitively correct in science. Right?
Yeah, it becomes a question of the scientific method. And
other than like certain fundamental realities, like the fact gravity exists.
But, I mean, is there fundamental forces in history? Some people do argue that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you should go. You should go.
It's kind of a dangerous road to go down because often it's important to do. Like at all, we can't just do micro history. Mm-hmm. There are large trends that are worth studying and things like over they call it the long durée of like 20 or 30 or 40 years of history and cycles that repeat and important things like that. But there is the dangerous road of if you go down that too far and you take it to its conclusion, it becomes, we can explain everything in history with this one thing, clash of civilizations. Like all of history is a conflict between cultural groups in quotations.
Yeah. Or materialist analysis, where all of history is determined by class struggle.
Yeah, even that's really reductionist. And again, it's important to consider that's not to deride either of those as like tools.
Yeah.
It's perspectives you should consider, but not on their own, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it's not super productive to say that all of history is, as Marx declared it, was a struggle between various classes. But you can say that...
But you can't say it wasn't at all. Like,
no, that's it.
it's
Like,
not
obviously,
a factor.
Yeah, it's the same thing as like, oh yeah, as much as like it's widely derived, like people don't really like it, Clash of Civilizations, for being kind of reductionist. There's an argument to be made that there's a level of conflict between they're arbitrarily defined cultural groups, and there's things to be said about that. But I think you can't just, because if you take it too far, you say, well, one is the only solution. It's not really like a one size fits all.
Mm-hmm.
You can say like, well, class conflict's important, but you also have to consider, you know, cultural history, social history.
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's hard to make one kind of unified system that explains all of history.
Right.
Because you'd have to take into account, like we were talking before, like an impossibly large amount of variables.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you there. I think I'd have a hard time wording that, but seeing as you're, you know, doing historiography.
I'm doing my best with my intro to historiography, my like 299 class.
No, but that's even more than I have. So like I have a hard time wording it, but that I think I'm of that same perspective, which I think it is. That's why it's important to mention that this comes from a work that has a very specific political point to make. Once you declare that history is a science and this is what happened, then you're
kind of legitimizing, obviously, your claim, because
you're trying to objectify isn't the right word, but make objective your interpretation of history.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, like you said, it's very reductionist because there's different ways of viewing it, different arguments that can be made.
Because we had the same discussion in one of our discussion groups for the class, but it is also dangerous to go down the road of saying, well, dangerous, but it's not very productive to go down the road of, oh, well, then we shouldn't bother with any large models. Like, everything should just be taken as it is with no outside context.
Yeah.
And at that point, you're just doing like micro histories of individual people and groups, and you're kind of neglecting the context they're in.
Yeah. Well, again, I feel like this whole discussion is just reminding me of the discussion around economics as a science, because like you just said about models, like economic models, there's a joke which is like, oh, economics is actually just one model that keeps getting more complicated as time goes on.
I love there's another good joke, which is, what's the difference between like why it's like a joke of why economics isn't a science.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, what's the difference between an economist and a physicist?
What is it?
So like a physicist, if he sees water running uphill, he's gonna change his model.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas an economist will say, that's weird, that can't happen. It's like, like supply and demand curves, they treat them like they're absolute and that they can't go so for example, when supply goes up, like demand goes up, supply goes down, they say that's impossible, that can't happen. But if they observe that happening, they would just say, well, that's impossible. Whereas a physicist who sees water running uphill will go, well, we need to change our models and what we're doing.
Yeah, no, that's why I prefer the term humanities for these kinds of subjects to social science. I think social science kind of builds in it. I mean, I think it's important in the sense that it's a better way to get funding.
Yeah, because not people treat it like it's like, oh, there's like literature, it doesn't contribute anything to society.
Exactly, no, because I don't think it's necessarily history is just a form of literature either, because I do think there is value. I think it's a different kind of value than science.
It's a branding thing, it's a
branding thing. So I think
it's about money.
I'm not going to ditch social science, but
please no, I need grant money.
Yeah, but I think, when it comes to trying to accurately describe what it is, at least when it comes to history specifically, I prefer the term humanities because it kind of ditches that expectation of absolute laws. Because, yes, it is true, in history, something happened, and that is the truth. Well, and then you get philosophical. Some people don't even think that's true. But in my view, something for certain happened in history because of certain causes. Whether or not we will fully comprehend I don't think we'll ever fully comprehend every single angle from every single possibility of, it's a bunch of potentials, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we'll reach every single one, but there is that. And history is seeking to understand that from as many different perspectives.
Like, it's not completely
possible.
Subjective. That's why I don't think it should be relegated to like an art or a.
Yeah, no, it's not. That's what I'm saying. That's not an art. It's not literature.
Yeah.
It's like, it is. There is an aspect of truth in it that is also important to the subject itself, which is why I prefer humanities instead of art. So, I don't think necessarily people calling it a science is like, oh, they're dumb. They don't know what they're talking about. Like, no, I understand where that's coming from because it's seeking to understand a truth, which is to a lot of people what science is, right? Rather than, for me, science is the process, not necessarily the goal. Because I do think history and science share the same goal. Like,
they're technically seeking the truth, if you will.
Yeah.
It's just
different processes.
Yeah, you can't really apply.
I wouldn't call like historical analysis like a scientific process.
No, I'm not reproducing the events in a lab. I'm not reproducing World War II in a lab and seeing if the same thing happens.
I don't think our computers are that
maybe
sophisticated
one day.
yet.
Maybe one day we'll be able to. But then again, you run into the problem of we need to know all the variables, or else it's not gonna. It's not reproducible.
Exactly.
It's too complex almost.
That's what it is. It's
It's fun to try to understand, though.
It is.
It's a lot of fun to try to argue.
I think history is constantly trying to be science in that way, right? And I think, again, the value of history is when it is viewed as a science, which I think is unfortunate, but I'm okay with that being in the public eye, like at least being in the public understanding.
Yeah.
If it means that history is capable of more.
Yeah. It's a sacrifice we have to make to have a department.
Yeah. Exactly. So, yeah. Okay, I'll go to a different quote. Let me just see which one I'd like to pick. Because I have one that's like very poetic that we could try to decipher, but...
But do some literary analysis, just like we're next episode is just gonna be talking about Isaac Asimov's Foundation and its significance to history.
I mean, if you want to talk about Isaac Asimov for the next episode, I'm not gonna.
I don't know if that qualifies as history. I mean, the whole theme of the book
his life is history. I'm just saying.
Oh yeah, no, he's a really interesting guy.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Unless you want to suddenly just pivot to analysis, literature.
Hey guys, we're gonna talk about books now.
Yeah, we're a book podcast now. Well, at least it'll be a bit more certain that we've actually read our books. That's all I'll say about that.
Wow, Ben, you don't do your readings for class?
No, I do. No, I mean, I'm more referencing like.
Oh, you mean like
people use like books as like an aesthetic?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't go on TikTok much, but like from what I see on like Instagram and stuff, is people who are like, I read 5 books in like 2 weeks, and I'm like,
I don't know
about that.
Did you really read them though?
Yeah, because there's like those charts which kind of show that like the purchasing of books is going up, but reading is going down.
Of course.
So there's something of that going on, like there's I think Gwyneth Paltrow had like an interior designer pick the books.
Oh,
that would be on her shelf.
It's funny.
I think it was Gwyneth Paltrow. I might be.
This is a really funny aside, but speaking of that, I found this out. There's a service you can buy as like a wealthier person or whatever, where you tell them the kind
of middle class.
I don't know how much it costs, but it's fairly expensive.
Yeah.
Because you're bulk buying books.
Yeah.
But it's like you just kind of decide on a color palette and what kind of vague theme you want, and they buy like rows of books to fill up your bookshelf. You give them like the dimensions, and they do that for you for your library, which I feel is like the saddest thing ever.
I feel like if it was just subject, that would actually be interesting. Like if it was like a bunch of these books about, let's say, history.
Yeah, because then it's like a goodie bag.
Yeah, but then especially if you pick the color, then like now I understand.
It's obviously an aesthetic.
Yeah, you're not making money off of
that's kind of sad
books of a certain subject.
Because like I would love to have a library, but it's because I want to fill it with all the books I've read. I don't know. It seems kind of.
No, it's what is it? Keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah, it's that whole we have to be.
Except now it's keeping up with everyone on the internet.
Oof.
Anyway,
we'll do a history of social media episode one day, and we'll just rant about that.
Well, has it existed for?
I don't really
far
think
enough and long enough to make a history.
We're gonna start with the stone tablets and the.
We're gonna talk about what Socrates thought of the written word.
Yeah, of the written word exactly, and we'll go up to today.
Okay, so this is a longer one. This is from Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Are you familiar with that book?
No, I don't think so.
Silent Spring. It was. Let me just make sure I have my facts straight. It was a very important book in terms of understanding like ecology and like the environment. It was written in 1962.
Was she not the one who campained against the use of pesticides?
Yes, it was DDT specifically.
The DDT in the United States, yes.
That book was...
I have heard of this book then, yes.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But she has a quote about history as well in that book, which is a very long one, so,
bear with us.
Yeah, exactly. The history of life on Earth has been a history of interaction between living things and their surroundings. To a large extent, the physical form and the habits of the Earth's vegetation and its animal life have been molded by the environment, Considering the whole span of earthly time, the opposite effect, in which life actually modifies its surroundings, has been relatively slight. Only within the moment of time represented by the present century has one species, present century was 1900s, or I guess 1800s, 1900s, you get it, from the Industrial Revolution. Only within the moment of time represented by the present, quote unquote, century has one species, man, acquired significant power. Well, one species, man, acquired significant power to alter the nature of his world.
That's an interesting idea. I mean, that's probably...
This is from a perspective of someone definitely in the environmental science. Just like how the last one was from someone making a historical point. This person is also making a kind of political point, but from the perspective of specifically like ecology, environmentalism, all that.
I don't know if I would say that we haven't... I don't know if it's a new phenomena that we've had an effect in our environment.
It doesn't say it's new. It says...
Is it like a significant...
The opposite effect in which life actually modifies its surroundings has been relatively slight.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I guess you could...
So it's like relatively insignificant compared to the Industrial Revolution and beyond.
Well, yeah, basically. Obviously with climate change and, just polluting the atmosphere. That's not... Animals don't do that.
Right. I mean, I think we're both on the side of climate change is real.
Yes, it goes without saying.
Yeah. For us, it goes without saying.
Yeah,
all right?
for us.
We won't take argument. And comments can say whatever. We'll not change our opinions on that for comments. Sorry.
But, yeah. She says all of history is an interaction. I would say...
interaction between living things and their surroundings.
I would say people are shaped by... Again, that's a...
Yeah, basically the point is that for the longest times, it's been mostly interaction between living things and their surroundings, but mostly that the surroundings govern how living things can be.
I think that's fair. Especially about human beings.
Humans are basically the first to overcome that.
That's I would argue that's definitely true. I think that's...
Yeah, I mean, I think that is true to a certain extent, but I also don't.
Well, I think it's because she's basically saying because, it's the whole, like, we have rational thought and whatever.
Well, conscious thought.
Yeah, conscious.
I don't think it's very rational to
actually,
planet.
We're an entirely rational creature. No.
Okay, Aristotle.
I think it's because we choose and we're like actively deciding. Because like when a beaver builds a dam, he's not like deforesting because he's really like choosing. I guess that gets into like, do animals make decisions?
Then that's an ultimate question, right?
Yeah, or are we only acting on instinct? It's just much more complex instinct. At what point is it different?
Yeah. My instinct is to drink a lot after my graduation at a university.
Is that well? It reminds me of this Clifford Geertz quote I read that cracks me up. I was like, this is an amazing thing to think about because he's talking about religion. It's not important, but like how religion is like a system of symbols.
Well, religion is important, just to be clear, but not important to the subject right now.
Not
to be clear.
Yeah, religion isn't important to what we're talking about right now, but religion as a whole, yes, is obviously important. But he says religion is a system of symbols and stuff that govern and teach you how to understand and live in the world. Okay, very
right.
It's very standard understanding of religion anthropology.
Mm-hmm.
And he says his example is basically why animals don't have religion. He's like, well, when a beaver is born, in his genetic code, he knows how to do hydraulic engineering and build a dam. But human beings don't know that. They need someone to create a symbol of a plan or something how to understand the world around them.
They need a blueprint. They need something. And
I found that interesting, and I wonder if that maybe relates to this a bit, where animals don't really do that because they just... I don't want to imply they're like automatons and they don't like make decisions, but like people have a...
Well, I think there's a gradient, right?
Yeah.
Like, for example,
we're further on the end of conscious thought.
Because I think, for example, if you take a crow or like the species of bird within that kind of genus, they seem to have a higher capacity for making independent or autonomous decisions, right? Based on certain factors, though, because then that's the question of is it just very complicated instinct that...
But at that point, you could argue what we do is very complicated.
Well, that's
instinct,
what I'm saying.
yeah.
Because then
what is there really a big difference? And there isn't.
Right.
I don't think between us and animals.
But I think I'm just going to bring it back to the subject of this quote, which is again like
affected by
man being the only species ever to have a significant power to alter the nature of the world.
I think the world as a whole, yeah. I mean, there's no animal that has polluted or changed, the temperature of the world on a global scale, or has caused as much deforestation. The beavers didn't cut down half the Amazon or whatever.
Right. But then, in a sense, right, do you think then this potentially causing let's say extinction level event, been a very long term because species keep going extinct, like a lot, and have been ever
right,
since.
but we cause,
which is caused by us. But I mean, like, is that not then natural that a species that kind of destroys the planet destroys itself?
do you mean?
But then that's a question of whether or not we're destroying ourselves
yeah,
through destroying the planet.
I mean, I think so, but it's
But is that not then, in a way,
a natural
process?
That's the whole argument, though. It's because, like, how much do you differentiate us from our animals? Because if you accept that we're animals and we're part of where there's no fundamental difference between us other than a gradient of maybe intelligence or however we evolved, then
very atheist. Go on.
You can believe in God and evolution.
No, I know. I'm just kidding.
But you know, if you accept
not a young Earth creationist,
if
like
you
me. No, I'm kidding. I'm not.
If you accept that that premise, then everything we do is natural, right? Like, at what point does what we do become unnatural? Like, you say cities are unnatural. Like, birds build nests. What if they built giant nests that,
skyscraper nests?
Yeah, but it's true.
They just keep
We're
going.
just more like, we just do it on a larger scale, and we're just a very successful species. But I don't know if birds built like giant nests and there was billions of them on the planet. Would that be natural?
I mean, I think maybe even a better example is like either ants or like moles.
Yeah,
like animals that create very complex systems of like habitats, right? That create their own habitats.
And that gets into another question I have, because like ants have hierarchy,
Yeah.
But it's like
But I think especially with ants, then you get the discussion again of consciousness and
like how much of that is
they
just
mostly operate a lot on like pheromones and like instinct. Like a lot of like predators, for example, can take advantage of how different chemicals impact their different instincts.
But they do agriculture. So like if they did that on a large scale, they grow fungus in some of their
that's true,
colonies?
Yeah.
So if that was on a large scale, would that still be natural? Like if they were destroying the environment
was there
to grow?
an ant Neolithic period?
Neolithic revolution. But if there's
or no, Paleolithic, I think.
Yeah, if there were ants that somehow got to be as more populous than they are now, and were like destroying forests to plant fungi, is that like a natural process?
That's a question.
Like if somehow but maybe it's because we're throwing it, but the system gets thrown out of whack. But would you say that, because when we think of, environmental catastrophe and extinction events, it's often an outside force, like the meteor.
Yeah, an external factor.
Like a meteor or a volcanic eruption. Has it ever happened that like an animal just got too successful?
I mean, it's happened on small scales. That's the thing, but I don't think it's ever happened. Oh, this is 4 billion years of...
Like, we don't know how this might have happened.
But and as far as I'm aware,
I think we'd be able to
of
see
our
that
history on the planet, yeah, we would be able to. Usually it's
if
like
it's global.
volcanic, like climatological...
It's things beyond the control of individual animals.
Yeah, which
like
maybe certain species kind of contributed to it somehow, but not necessarily by themselves.
And they
in
weren't
the same way that humans have.
And they're not the definitive reason why that happened. It's more because like our orbit changed or the meteor hit Earth, or so is that what makes us different? Is that we're causing it?
Yeah, we're the Earth's first self-produced extinction.
But maybe the argument is that animals aren't. Like they would self-regulate.
Well, I don't think they're making argument about animals. They're making argument about humans.
No, but if you like follow this, is it that
follow the train of logic?
Yeah, is it that animals, not that they know, but the ecosystem will sort of balance itself out before an animal can get too strong?
No, I don't think it makes a statement about why things are. It just makes the statement that no other living thing has been able to impact its environment to the same degree as humans.
I would say that.
The history that we're aware of.
But that's true, though, I would say.
I think that
but then the interesting question is why. It's the why.
No, that's the quote, and I think we both agree. I mostly brought it up because I think the question is, that kind of brings up the question, I think I even asked this before, of like, what makes someone human? And like, amount of words. I think that's one of the most unique things about the entire human race that you can say about all of them, is that our impact on the environment.
Well, yeah, the ability to cause an extinction event.
Well, potentially,
or to just even significantly alter it in a way that, across the world.
Yes.
Also, we exist on every continent, even Antarctica.
Oh yeah, even Atlantica.
Antarctica. New pseudo history drop.
Antarctica. Sorry, I'm actively being converted into certain
views.
Yeah.
No, it's actually a really fascinating question. I've never thought about that, really.
Yeah, but again, that's not as much a historical question as much as it's...
we need an ecologist to chime in. We need like a biologist or something.
Was it Frank Herbert? No, he's a journalist. Was an ecologist or something?
I don't know if he was an ecologist, but he had a really big interest in ecology. Yeah, that's part of why he wrote Dune.
Yeah, but that's another person that'd be interesting to interview. Frank Herbert.
Have we elapsed our time?
I think we're getting pretty far along. I think we pretty much elapsed our time. So
All right.
I hope this was an interesting discussion. What do you think about it?
I certainly thought it was very interesting. Lots of questions I've never really dwelled on. That's what I like about this podcast, though. It's also just an exercise for me to like talk about ideas I don't normally get a chance to talk about. And
we're always in a lecture hall listening to people writing about things that we're listening about. It's nice to
talk about it. Yeah.
Make analyses on the spot, and
practicing my debate skills and my critical thinking.
Your debate skills. Well, we're not disagreeing much.
Okay,
so
sorry. Our critical we need to find something really controversial.
No, we need to disagree on something. That's the problem.
We need to find something super, like for us, that would be controversial between the two of us that we don't agree on.
Well, I mean, I could play devil's advocate.
Well, it's fun to do that sometimes.
Yeah. And I think it's fun to take the unpopular position and justify it. I think it's also a good way to argue against the position that you're facetiously adopting, because then it gives other people, forces other people to
like
come up with more
ideas,
ammunition, have more counter arguments. It's good. Try to play devil's advocate, or maybe not devil's. Yeah, no, play devil's advocate more.
That's our message for this episode.
That's our message. Argue for things you disagree with. Be facetious.
Well, don't lie, but
anyway, I guess see you guys later for next week for a more research topic by you. Yeah?
I haven't decided yet, so it'll be a surprise. Well, they'll know what the title is when the video comes out, but for
it'll
us,
be a surprise
it's a surprise
for me.
It's a surprise for Ben.
I can't wait. This will be great.
Well, thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you very much. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.